The envelope sat on Richard Sterling's mahogany desk like an accusation, my full name written across it in handwriting that made my breath catch in my throat. Elena Christina Martinez. Not cleaning lady. Not hey you. My complete, proper name in elegant script that belonged to another world entirely. A world I deliberately left behind 6 months ago, when I traded my penthouse view for a janitor's cart and a hairnet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to the beginning, to the moment I first pushed that squeaky cart through the marble lobby of Sterling and Associates, my worn uniform hanging loose on my frame, my eyes cast downward in the perfect imitation of invisibility. That's what I'd come here to learn, after all. What it meant to be invisible, to be overlooked, to be the kind of person my grandmother had spent her entire fortune making sure I would never become. My abuela had died 3 months before I took the job at the law firm. Cancer, swift and merciless, taking her from vibrant matriarch to frail shadow in the span of a single Chicago winter. She left me everything: the estate in Barcelona, the investments, the property holdings scattered across 3 continents. $17 million, give or take, depending on the market. Enough money to never work another day in my life. Enough money to insulate me completely from the struggles of ordinary people. And that's exactly what terrified me. I'd grown up wealthy, cushioned, protected. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 7, and abuela had raised me in luxury, surrounding me with private tutors and country clubs, and people who smiled at my jokes regardless of whether they were funny. I'd never scrubbed a floor, never worried about a utility bill, never felt the weight of someone's contempt simply because of what I did for a living. When she died, leaving me alone with all that money, I realized I'd never actually lived. I'd existed in a bubble, and I had no idea who I really was beneath the wealth. So I'd done something my therapist called dramatically inadvisable, and my financial advisor called absolutely insane. I'd hidden my inheritance in trusts and investments, rented a modest studio apartment in Pilsen, and taken a job as a night janitor. I wanted to understand struggle. I wanted to know how ordinary people survived, how they maintained their dignity in the face of casual cruelty, how they found meaning in work that others dismissed as beneath consideration. What I found instead was Richard Sterling. He was the senior partner at Sterling and Associates, a prestigious firm specializing in corporate law. 53 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of distinguished good looks that come from generations of proper nutrition and expensive dental care. His corner office on the 42nd floor was a testament to ego, walls lined with diplomas from Harvard and Yale, awards from bar associations, photographs of himself shaking hands with senators and CEOs. Everything in that room screamed importance, demanded respect, insisted on reverence, and he treated me like garbage. The first time I cleaned his office, he was still there, working late on some merger or acquisition. I'd knocked quietly, announced myself in the broken English I'd carefully cultivated, "Excuse, I clean now," and waited for permission to enter. He'd looked up from his desk, his pale blue eyes sweeping over me with the kind of assessment usually reserved for furniture. "Make it quick," he'd said, not quite looking at my face. "And don't touch anything on the desk. Last girl moved my papers around, had to fire her." I'd nodded, kept my eyes down, and started with the windows. I was acutely aware of him watching me, judging the efficiency of my movements, the thoroughness of my work. When I'd reached for the garbage can near his desk, he'd pulled his feet back with an exaggerated gesture, as if I might contaminate his Italian leather shoes. "You people ever learn to work quietly?" he'd asked, speaking slowly and loudly as if I were stupid rather than simply foreign. "In this country we value efficiency. Understand? Efficiency." I'd nodded again, something hot and bitter rising in my throat, but I'd swallowed it down, smiled my docile smile, and continued cleaning. This was what I'd come for after all. This was the education I'd sought, the knowledge of how it felt to be dismissed, to be treated as less than human. I just hadn't expected it to hurt quite so much. Over the following weeks, Sterling's treatment evolved from dismissive to actively cruel. He began leaving deliberate messes: coffee spilled on the carpet, papers scattered across the floor, his private bathroom in a state that suggested he'd never been taught basic hygiene. He'd arrive late on Fridays, timing it so he'd be there when I came to clean, manufacturing reasons to criticize my work. "This window has a streak," he'd say, pointing at glass I'd polished to transparency. "In America, we take pride in our work. Maybe in Mexico." "Colombia," I'd interrupted once, forgetting myself. My fictional backstory placed me in Bogotá, not Mexico City. His eyes had hardened. "I don't care where you're from. The point is, here we do things properly. You want to keep this job, then learn some standards." I'd apologized, kept my head down, and re-cleaned the spotless window. But it wasn't just Sterling. His behavior set the tone for the entire firm. Once the senior partner established that the cleaning staff were acceptable targets for contempt, others followed his lead. Junior associates would dump their coffee cups without bothering to aim for the trash can. Paralegals left passive-aggressive notes about missed spots that didn't exist. The other partners began speaking about me in the "Is the cleaning lady reliable?" one would ask Sterling while I emptied the wastebasket 3 feet away. "Because I've been noticing the quality of service declining." "You get what you pay for," Sterling would respond, shrugging. "These people, they're not exactly Harvard material. They do the work Americans don't want to do. Someone has to." The other janitors on my shift noticed the treatment too. Maria, a grandmother from Guatemala who'd been cleaning office buildings for 20 years, pulled me aside one night in the break room. "Mija, you okay?" she asked in Spanish, her weathered hands gentle on my arm. "That's Sterling, he's worse to you than the others. You want me to say something to supervisor?" I'd shaken my head, touched by her concern but aware that any complaint would only make things worse. "I'm fine, Maria, thank you." "You're too good for this," she'd said, studying my face with eyes that saw more than I wanted to reveal. "Something about you, you don't belong here, not like the rest of us." She'd been more right than she knew, but I couldn't tell her that. Couldn't explain that I was playing at poverty, experimenting with invisibility, while she and the others lived it every day. The guilt of that knowledge sat heavy in my stomach, making me question the entire endeavor. Who was I to appropriate their struggle? What right did I have to pretend I understood their lives when I could escape at any moment back to my millions? But I stayed. Partly because I'm stubborn, partly because I'd committed to giving this experiment a full year, but mostly because I needed to see it through. I needed to understand what my abuela had protected me from all those years: the casual cruelty of class division, the grinding wear of being treated as disposable. And then, 3 months into my employment, something shifted. It started with a photograph. I was cleaning Sterling's office on a Friday evening, following my usual routine: dust the bookshelves, wipe down the desk, empty the trash, vacuum the carpet. Sterling was gone, thankfully, off to some charity gala where he'd make a show of generosity while treating the waitstaff like servants. As I dusted his credenza, my cloth caught the edge of a silver frame, sending it tumbling to the carpet. I bent to retrieve it, and found myself staring at a family photo: Sterling with his wife and 2 teenage children, all of them dressed in white, posed on what looked like a yacht. They were beautiful people, their smiles perfect, their teeth blazingly white against tan skin. The American dream, captured and framed. But as I looked closer, I noticed something. Sterling's hand rested on his daughter's shoulder, but she leaned slightly away from him. His son looked at the camera rather than his father. His wife's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a performance of happiness rather than the real thing. I set the photo back carefully, but the image stayed with me. For the first time, I considered that maybe Richard Sterling wasn't just a villain in my narrative experiment. Maybe he was also a human being, complex and flawed, possibly unhappy despite all his wealth and status. The thought made me uncomfortable. It was easier to dismiss him as simply cruel, to use his behavior as data in my study of human nature. Seeing him as three-dimensional, as potentially struggling with his own demons, complicated everything. The next Friday, I paid closer attention. I noticed the prescription bottles in his desk drawer when I emptied the trash: anxiety medication, sleeping pills. I saw the half-empty bottles of expensive scotch hidden in his filing cabinet. I read, without meaning to, the email open on his computer screen. His wife's lawyer, discussing preliminary divorce proceedings. Richard Sterling, it turned out, was falling apart behind his facade of success. And he was taking it out on everyone beneath him in the hierarchy, especially those who couldn't fight back. Understanding didn't excuse his behavior, but it contextualized it. I thought about Abuela, about the lessons she'd tried to teach me before she died. People are complicated, me Amber, she'd said during one of our last conversations. They hurt others because they themselves are hurting. This doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. Still, Sterling's treatment continued to escalate. One evening in late February, he arrived at the office while I was cleaning, clearly drunk from whatever event he'd attended. He stumbled past me without acknowledgement, then suddenly turned back. You, he slurred, pointing at me with the hand holding his scotch glass. You think I don't notice? You watching me, judging me. You people always judging, acting like you're better than. He'd trailed off, swaying slightly. I'd stood frozen, my hands gripping the handle of my cleaning cart, unsure whether to flee or stay. My wife's leaving me, he said suddenly, his voice cracking. 25 years, she's taking everything, the house, the kids, half my partnership. He laughed, a bitter sound that filled the empty office. And you know what? I can't even blame her. I'm a miserable son of a bitch, I know it. Everyone knows it. For a moment, I'd almost felt sorry for him. Almost responded with compassion, broken character, offered comfort. But then he turned those pale blue eyes on me, and the moment of vulnerability vanished. Get out, he'd said coldly. Come back Monday. I don't want to look at you right now. I'd left, but the encounter haunted me. I was witnessing a man's complete unraveling, and he was dragging everyone around him down with his dissent. The other lawyers at the firm had started avoiding him. The support staff whispered about his erratic behavior. And he seemed to be lashing out more viciously at the people who couldn't escape, people like me. The Thursday before I found the envelope, things came to a head. I'd been cleaning the main conference room when Sterling entered with 3 junior associates. They didn't acknowledge my presence, simply began discussing a major case the firm was handling. I'd continued wiping down the table, invisible as always, as they spread documents and argued strategy. The environmental impact report is going to be a problem, one of the associates said. The community groups are organizing opposition. Sterling had slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump, including me. I don't care about community groups. Our client is paying us 7 figures to make this development happen. We bury the opposition in paperwork, drag everything out until they lose funding and momentum. Standard playbook. But sir, the contamination evidence is inconclusive. That's what we'll argue. Look, these people, Sterling gestured vaguely toward the windows, toward the neighborhoods that would be affected by his client's development. They don't matter. They're not our concern. Our concern is winning. I'd kept cleaning, but my hands trembled with rage. This was what I'd wanted to see, wasn't it? The machinery of privilege, the casual dismissal of ordinary people's lives. But knowing it intellectually and witnessing it directly were 2 different things. As the associates filed out, Sterling had finally noticed me. You, he'd said, you were listening to a confidential legal discussion. You understand that's a violation. I could have you fired. I'd looked at him directly for the first time in months, forgetting to maintain my submissive posture. I understand, I'd said in perfect, unaccented English. His eyes had widened slightly, recognition flickering across his face, recognition that I was more than he'd assumed. But then his expression hardened. Get out. And if I hear one word of this discussion repeated anywhere, you'll be gone. Understand. I'd nodded and left, my heart pounding. I'd almost blown my cover, almost revealed myself out of sheer frustration. That night, lying in my modest studio apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I'd questioned everything. What was I accomplishing with this charade? Was I actually learning anything meaningful, or was I just indulging in privileged tourism while real people suffered real consequences? I'd almost quit. Almost called my financial advisor and told him to start unwinding the trusts. I could go back to Barcelona, manage Abuela's estate, live the comfortable life she'd wanted for me. But then Friday came. My last Friday, I'd decided. I'd finish out the week, give my notice, and end this experiment before I lost myself completely. I'd started my shift at 6 p.m., working my way up through the floors. The building was largely empty, most of the lawyers having left early for weekend plans. I'd saved Sterling's office for last, as always, dreading the encounter but determined to maintain professionalism until the end. His door was unlocked, his office empty. I'd felt relief wash over me as I pushed my cart inside, grateful for the solitude. I'd started with my usual routine, dusting, trash, windows, trying to memorize the space, knowing this would be the last time I'd be in this particular room pretending to be someone I wasn't. That's when I'd spotted the envelope. It sat in the center of his desk, impossible to miss, cream-colored and expensive, but it was the name written across it that stopped me cold: Elena Cristina Martinez. Not Elena Martinez, cleaner. Not Ms. Martinez, janitor. My full name, the name my grandmother had given me, written in handwriting I recognized immediately. My hands shook as I reached for it. The envelope wasn't sealed, the flap simply tucked inside. I pulled out the letter with trembling fingers, my eyes scanning the elegant script, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then I've passed away, and you've found your way to this exact moment, a moment I've been watching for with great interest over these past months. Yes, my dear, I've known all along. Did you really think you could work in my firm without me recognizing Carmen's granddaughter? Your abuela was not just my client but my friend of 40 years. She told me everything about you, your intelligence, your compassion, your search for meaning beyond the wealth she'd accumulated. When she died, she made me promise to watch over you, to let you find your own path, but to step in if necessary. She also made me promise something else. She asked me to be patient, to wait until you'd completed your journey of understanding, and then to give you the tools to make a real difference. Elena, I'm dying. Cancer, much like Carmen. The doctors give me 3 months, perhaps 4. I've spent my life building this firm, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what matters. I've watched good people like Richard Sterling transform into monsters of ambition and ego. I've enabled a culture that treats human beings as disposable. I've watched you these past months through the security cameras, seen how you've endured humiliation and cruelty with grace. I've witnessed your struggle to understand the lives of ordinary working people, your genuine attempt to step outside privilege and see the world differently. You've passed a test you didn't know you were taking. Carmen left you her fortune. I'm leaving you mine, specifically, my 40% controlling stake in Sterling and Associates. You are now the majority shareholder, Elena. You have the power to reshape this firm, to create the kind of workplace culture that honors every human being, regardless of their position. Use it wisely. Use it with the compassion Carmen instilled in you. And use it to teach people like Richard Sterling what your abuela and I learned late in life, that how we treat those who can seemingly do nothing for us reveals our true character. The board meeting is scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. My attorney will read my will. You'll be notified officially, of course, but I wanted you to have this moment first. This moment of choice. You can walk away, sell your shares, return to Barcelona. Or you can step up, reveal yourself, and use your power to make real change. I hope you choose the latter. The world needs people like you, people who understand both sides of the divide, who have experienced both privilege and invisibility. With deepest respect and affection. Marcus Whitfield. I read the letter 3 times, my mind refusing to process the words. Marcus Whitfield, the founding partner of Sterling and Associates, the man whose name appeared on every piece of firm letterhead. I'd seen him exactly once, being wheeled through the lobby during my second week, an elderly man with kind eyes who'd nodded at me when our paths crossed. He'd known, the entire time he'd known who I was, and now he was dead or dying and he'd left me control of the firm. I looked around Sterling's office with new eyes. This space, this shrine to ego and achievement, was now partially mine. The entire firm, 42 floors of marble and glass, hundreds of employees, millions in annual revenue, was now under my control. The magnitude of it threatened to crush me. I'd wanted to learn about powerlessness, about invisibility, about the lives of ordinary people. Instead, I'd been handed extraordinary power, the ability to reshape an entire institution. What would Abuela think? What would she want me to do? I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my uniform pocket. My shift wasn't over. I still had the rest of Sterling's office to clean, had to maintain my cover for 3 more days until Monday's board meeting. I couldn't afford to change my behavior, couldn't risk tipping anyone off. So I continued my routine. I wiped down Sterling's desk, vacuumed his carpet, cleaned his private bathroom. But everything felt different now, charged with potential. Each object in the office was now partially mine. Each diploma on the wall belonged to a firm I controlled. Each photograph of Sterling's fake family portrait represented a man whose professional fate I now held in my hands. The power was intoxicating and terrifying. I finished cleaning and pushed my cart out, nodding to the security guard on my way to the service elevator. In the elevator, descending toward the basement where the janitorial staff stored their equipment, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished metal doors. I looked exactly the same, worn uniform, sensible shoes, hair pulled back in a practical bun. But I felt transformed. That weekend was the longest of my life. I couldn't tell anyone about the letter, couldn't share the news. I spent Saturday in my studio apartment, rereading Marcus Whitfield's words, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to sell the shares and escape the responsibility. I'd signed up for observation, not intervention. I'd wanted to understand poverty, not to wield power. But another part of me, the part that sounded like abuela, whispered that this was exactly why I'd undertaken the experiment in the first place. I'd wanted to understand how the other half lived so I could make a difference. Now I had the chance. Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to my storage unit across town, the one where I'd locked away my previous life. I opened the boxes containing my designer clothes, my expensive jewelry, my leather portfolio. I tried on an Armani suit, stood in front of the small mirror, and practiced being Elena Cristina Martinez, millionaire heiress and majority shareholder. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the janitor who'd cleaned Richard Sterling's office for months. She looked powerful, confident, in control. But when I looked closely at her eyes, I saw something that hadn't been there 6 months ago: understanding. Empathy, a hard-won knowledge of what it meant to be invisible. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I dressed carefully in my best suit, navy blue, perfectly tailored, paired with Louboutin heels and subtle diamond earrings that had belonged to Abuela. I left my hair down, applied makeup with a careful hand, and looked at myself one last time before leaving my apartment. "This is it," I whispered to my reflection. "No going back." I arrived at Sterling and Associates at 8:30 a.m., a full half-hour before the board meeting. The lobby was bustling with the Monday morning rush, lawyers in expensive suits, support staff clutching coffee cups, everyone moving with purpose through the marble space. No one recognized me. Why would they? They'd never actually looked at my face. I took the main elevator up to the executive floor, my heart pounding with each ascending number. The doors opened onto a plush waiting area where a receptionist sat behind a curved desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, giving me the once-over, clearly trying to place me. "Elena Martinez," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm here for the board meeting regarding Marcus Whitfield's estate." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, yes, of course. Conference room A. Can I get you coffee?" "No, thank you." I walked past her, my heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. The conference room was already filling up, the remaining partners, the firm's attorney, representatives from various departments. And there, at the head of the table, sat Richard Sterling. He looked terrible. His skin had a gray tinge, his eyes were bloodshot, and his expensive suit hung loose on his frame. Whatever demons he'd been fighting had clearly won. I smiled and took a seat directly across from him. "I'm here for the reading of Marcus Whitfield's will. I'm Elena Martinez." I watched recognition struggle across his features. The name was familiar, he'd written it on my paychecks after all, but he couldn't quite place it. The woman in front of him bore no resemblance to the invisible janitor who cleaned his office. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "Have we met?" "Every Friday," I replied calmly, "for the past 6 months." The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, then at Sterling, trying to understand the connection. Sterling's face went through several shades of pale, settling on a sickly white. "You," he started, then stopped. "The cleaning woman." "Janitor," I corrected gently. Though actually, I prefer my official title, which is about to be majority shareholder. The firm's attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, cleared her throat. Perhaps we should begin. As you all know, Marcus Whitfield passed away 3 weeks ago. He left very specific instructions regarding his estate, particularly his ownership stake in this firm. She opened her briefcase and pulled out official documents. Mr. Whitfield owned 40% of Sterling and Associates, making him the largest single shareholder. In his will, he left this entire stake to Ms. Elena Cristina Martinez, whom he names as a family friend and the granddaughter of his late client, Carmen Alvarez Martinez. The room erupted. Partners began speaking over each other, demanding explanations. Sterling sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, unable to process what he was hearing. Patricia raised her hand for silence. There's more. Mr. Whitfield also left a letter to be read to the board. Ms. Martinez, with your permission. I nodded, bracing myself. Patricia read Marcus Whitfield's final message to the firm he'd built. He detailed his disappointment with the culture that had developed, the treatment of lower-level employees, the prioritization of profit over people. He explained that he'd watched Elena's experiment through the security cameras, had witnessed the casual cruelty she'd endured, and had decided that she was exactly the kind of person the firm needed to lead it into the future. I leave her my shares with full confidence that she will use them to create the kind of workplace I'd always hoped this firm would be, one that values every human being, from senior partner to maintenance staff. I trust her judgment, her compassion, and her understanding of both privilege and struggle. The future of Sterling and Associates is in her hands. When Patricia finished reading, the silence was absolute. Every eye in the room turned to me. I stood, taking my time, meeting each person's gaze. I know you have questions. I know this seems unusual, perhaps even manipulative. You're wondering why a millionaire would pretend to be a janitor, what I was trying to prove, what I want from this firm. I paused, thinking of Abuela, of Marcus, of all the lessons I'd learned these past 6 months. 6 months ago, I inherited a fortune from my grandmother. She'd spent her life building wealth, but she'd also spent it understanding people, all kinds of people. I looked directly at Sterling. What I found was systematic dehumanization. I watched intelligent, hardworking people treated as less than human simply because of their job titles. I experienced discrimination based on assumptions about my ethnicity, my intelligence, my worth. I saw how power corrupts, how privilege blinds, how easy it is to justify cruelty when you've convinced yourself that certain people simply don't matter. Sterling's face had progressed from white to red. This is outrageous, he said, his voice shaking. You spied on us, you invaded our privacy, you. I cleaned your office, I interrupted calmly. I did the job I was hired to do. The fact that you said and did things in front of me that you'd never do in front of someone you considered an equal, that's not my fault. That's yours. I turned to address the full board. I'm not here to destroy this firm. I'm here to transform it. Effective immediately, I'm implementing new policies. Every employee, regardless of position, will be treated with respect and dignity. We'll conduct bias training for all attorneys. We'll establish a living wage for support staff. We'll create pathways for advancement based on merit, not connections. You can't just waltz in here and change everything, one of the other partners shouted. You don't know anything about running a law firm. You're right, I agreed. I don't, but I know about people. And I know that a firm's greatest asset isn't its client list or its win record, it's its people, all of its people. I looked at Sterling again. As for you, Richard, I'm not going to fire you. I'm going to offer you a choice. You can leave now with a severance package and your reputation intact. Or you can stay, but in a reduced capacity, with the understanding that your behavior towards staff will be monitored. You'll also be required to participate in counseling to address whatever pain is driving your cruelty. His hands were shaking. You're enjoying this, aren't you, getting your revenge on me? No, I said honestly. I'm not. I pity you, Richard. You have so much intelligence, education, resources, and you've used it all to make yourself and everyone around you miserable. That's not revenge, that's tragedy. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. We discussed logistics, voting procedures, the legal framework for the changes I wanted to implement. Some partners were supportive, seeing an opportunity for positive change. I let them rage. I answered questions. I listened to concerns. And gradually, I watched the power dynamics in the room shift. They'd started the meeting looking at me with contempt or confusion. They ended it with wariness and, in some cases, grudging respect. When it finally ended, Sterling approached me alone. The conference room had emptied, leaving just the two of us among the scattered papers and cold coffee cups. Why? He asked quietly. Why go through all of this? You could have just bought shares on the open market, joined the board legitimately. Why the charade? I considered the question carefully, because I needed to know the truth. Not the truth people tell you when they're trying to impress you or get something from you. The real truth, how people behave when they think no one important is watching. And what truth did you find? That hurt people, I said. That privilege doesn't make you happy, and power doesn't make you good. That dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away, it's inherent. And that the measure of a person isn't their success or status, but how they treat those who have neither. Sterling was quiet for a long moment. I'm getting divorced, he said finally. My kids barely speak to me. I spend every night drinking alone in my apartment. You think I don't know I'm a miserable son of a bitch? I think you're human, I replied. Flawed and struggling and trying to survive in a system that prioritizes all the wrong things. But that doesn't excuse your behavior. It explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. He nodded slowly. I'll take the reduced role and the counseling, not because I have to, but because. He trailed off, then tried again. I don't want to be this person anymore. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, I transformed Sterling and Associates from the inside out. I continued cleaning on Friday nights, not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to maintain that connection to the people who kept the firm running, who emptied the trash and cleaned the bathrooms and made everything look perfect for the lawyers who got all the credit. Maria, my former supervisor, nearly fainted when I explained everything to her. She called me crazy, said I was loca for putting myself through that experience. But she also cried when I promoted her to head of facilities and tripled her salary. You didn't have to do this, she said, hugging me tightly. You didn't have to care. Yes, I did, I replied. My grandmother taught me that privilege is a responsibility, not a right. If I have power, I have an obligation to use it for good. I established scholarship programs for working-class law students. I partnered with community organizations that Sterling had tried to bury with paperwork. I implemented transparent salary structures and promoted women and people of color to leadership positions. I made enemies among the old guard, lost some clients who didn't like the firm's new direction. But I also attracted new clients, socially conscious companies and individuals who wanted legal representation that aligned with their values. I built a reputation for fairness and integrity, and slowly, painfully, I transformed the culture of the firm. Richard Sterling stayed on in his reduced role. He went to therapy, got sober, started rebuilding relationships with his children. One Friday evening, 6 months after the revelation, I was cleaning the office that used to be his, now occupied by a brilliant young Latina attorney I'd promoted, when he found me. You're still doing this? He asked, gesturing at my cleaning supplies. Every Friday, I confirmed. It keeps me honest, reminds me who I really am beneath all this. I gestured at my business suit, hanging in the closet while I wore jeans and a t-shirt for cleaning. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you an apology, a real one, not just for how I treated you, but for how I treated everyone. I was drowning, and I was taking everyone down with me. I know, I said. And I accept your apology. Just like that. Just like that. Forgiveness isn't about excusing behavior. It's about refusing to let that behavior define you or the person who hurt you. He nodded, blinking back tears. Your grandmother would be proud of you. I hope so, I said quietly. I really hope so. That night, finishing my cleaning shift, I thought about everything that had changed. I thought about Abuela and Marcus, about the gifts they'd left me, not just money or shares, but wisdom and purpose. I thought about the janitors and lawyers working side by side now, the barriers between them beginning to dissolve. I thought about dignity and worth, about privilege and responsibility, about how easy it is to dehumanize people when you've convinced yourself they're different from you. And I thought about how much harder, but infinitely more rewarding, it is to recognize the humanity in everyone. As I pushed my cleaning cart toward the service elevator, I passed a new janitor, a young man from Honduras who spoke minimal English. I smiled at him, greeted him in Spanish, asked about his family. His face lit up with gratitude at being seen, being acknowledged. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez," he said, "for this job, for the good wage, for treating us like people." "You are people," I replied. "Never forget that, and never let anyone treat you as less." He nodded, his eyes shining. "My daughter, she wants to be a lawyer, maybe someday." "Maybe someday soon," I said. "We have scholarships now." "Tell her to apply." The elevator doors closed, and I descended toward the basement, toward the end of another Friday night shift. Tomorrow, I'd return as the majority shareholder, dressed in my suit, wielding my power. But tonight, I was just Alina, a woman who'd learned that true character is revealed not by status or wealth, but by how we treat those who can seemingly do nothing for us. My grandmother had taught me that lesson through her life. Marcus Whitfield had taught me through his death. And Richard Sterling had taught me through his cruelty that even the most broken people can change when given the chance. I'd started this experiment searching for meaning beyond wealth. What I'd found was purpose. The purpose of using privilege to dismantle barriers, to create equity, to honor the dignity inherent in every human being. As I stored my cleaning cart and changed back into my street clothes, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The same face looked back at me, but everything behind the eyes had transformed. I wasn't the sheltered heiress who'd started this journey 6 months ago. I wasn't the invisible janitor who'd endured humiliation in silence. I was someone new, someone who understood both sides of the divide, who'd experienced privilege and powerlessness, who knew that the truest measure of success wasn't money or status, but the positive impact you had on the lives of others. I walked out of Sterling and Associates into the Chicago night, the city lights reflecting off the glass towers around me. Somewhere up there, on the 42nd floor, was the office where I'd found that envelope, that letter that changed everything. And somewhere else in the city, in modest apartments and crowded houses, were the people whose lives I'd touched, the janitors and mailroom clerks and security guards who now had living wages and dignity and hope. This was my grandmother's legacy. This was Marcus